Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding. I'm your host, Sarah Parker, and today we have a very cool episode for your ears. So, I am joined by a fellow podcaster who has collaborated with me to do a podcast on what we've learned as podcast hosts and plenty of anecdote we're going to share with you guys. So, you will hear the intro from his podcast because this will be going live on both of our podcast platforms. So the Beyond Condition podcast and Chasing Clarity. So without further ado, enjoy this episode.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon DeCruz, accredited nutritionist and online physique coach. And today's episode is a little bit different, and it's something that I'm very excited about. I'm doing a collaboration podcast, and I have Sarah Parker here with me, who is the host of the Beyond Condition podcast. And we decided that it would be great to bring our two audiences together and introduce ourselves to each other's worlds. So if you're tuning in from the Beyond Condition podcast, and this is your first time hearing me or hearing about the show, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And for those of you who listen to Chasing Clarity every week, you're going to get introduced to Sarah and her show. And I think you're really going to like what she's about, because even just off air, we were talking about a lot of things that we stand for, a lot of things that we've learned through the process of producing a podcast, being podcast hosts, and just really trying to put out great education and information to other people. And we're very much aligned. So what we're going to do on today's show is we're going to start by walking through like the why and the how of why we started our podcast, because this is a topic that isn't really discussed. And starting a podcast is much harder than many people imagine or they anticipate. And it's so common nowadays. But Sarah and I have been doing this for years, first and foremost, and then also have had hundreds of podcasts. So we've developed a skill set and also an ability to speak with people that then we're able to expose to our own audiences. So we're going to discuss our origins, what led us to get on the mic in the first place. And then we're going to go into some of the top lessons that we've learned through this process, because podcasting is something that a lot of times we do to empower you all through education, but we learn through this process. And that is one of the most reciprocal and empowering parts of this process. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. It is an absolute pleasure. I've seen your content for years, and we have a good mutual friend, Dr. Scott Stevenson. So I want to shout out Scott because he's my man. And that was something that brought us together. I'm really excited to get into this with you.
Yeah, I have to mirror that with Scott. What a mentor and what a person in the space. And I'm sure you're similar with me, when we first spoke and I invited him on the podcast. And this is something I've learned as a podcast host, that he's so real and he's just Scott, my best friend, right? Like we put people on perhaps a pedestal, as podcast hosts when we're starting out, it's like, oh, these people are going to be interested in coming on to speak with me. And then you get people like Scott that come on and you go, okay, we are just literally, as you say, people in the space that care, that want
Mhm.
to offer education and through that empowerment. And that's my, it's such an ethos to me to just empower people that you are someone and that we all count, we all do.
100%. I think one of the massive benefits of podcasting is we can reach people from around the world, not only in terms of our audience, but it connects someone like you and I. We're on completely different time zones. We're thousands of miles apart from each other, and we're able to share a connection, have a conversation, share our own lessons and our own experiences, and then also be able to go back and forth and really share some like-minded conversations, bounce ideas off of one another. And that was something that, like, for instance, I started podcasting initially in 2020 during the pandemic. And the reason for doing so was I'd been invited on podcasts for many years and I was turned it down initially. And this, well, I'll go into my story a little bit later, but it was the first opportunity that I had where I didn't have to travel for the corporate career that I had. So now I had this extra time built in my day, and I decided to accept some of these conversations. And the first podcast I ever did was an international podcast, and it's someone I still talk to this day. He doesn't podcast anymore. He doesn't do any social media, but it's someone that I connected with. And we have, we go through like WhatsApp because we're on completely different, continents and then time zones. But it's just a beautiful thing because we're able to connect with different people and then also be able to re-spark connections. So I'll give you an example with Scott personally. I've been doing mentoring sessions, private mentorship sessions. And then also I've went to many seminars and met with Scott, and I've, seen him presented alongside him on seminars, which was an absolute blessing. And then I've also had the pleasure of bringing him out to dinner and like spending hours at a time with him. But we can't always do that. And so he's in Florida. And at that time I was based in Jersey, and now I'm in Tennessee. We're still hours away from each other. And so a lot of times what we've done is we've connected through a podcast because we're able to share a conversation that we're both genuinely interested in. We're truly passionate. You can hear it on the podcast, just like I can hear when you're speaking with Scott. And we can connect, catch up, but we're able to benefit thousands of people that are listening in the process. Whereas if this wasn't even a platform, if we didn't have podcasting or we didn't have some medium of social media, especially in a long format, we would not be able to benefit so many other people. We would have these closed off connections. We'd have these conversations, which were truly beneficial for both of us, but they wouldn't benefit the greater good of our community. So I think that's one unique aspect about podcasting and why I'm like my best content comes out in long form because yes, I do social media content, I do Instagram reels and carousels and stuff, but it's really hard to explain the nuances of something, get into the context, and then really have a back and forth conversation with someone in the constraints of 2,000 characters.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, we are in this fast-paced world, and I feel like, and I heard this once, when you listen to a podcast, like that might be your only what we could deem as human interaction across a day, across a week even, and this is something that I think about in every episode because an intimate exchange being voices in someone's ears, and I'm sure you hold this with pride as well. I mean, I feel like it's a huge responsibility for both of us because you never know where someone is at. When we can have these conversations, and like you and I today, like when we both podcast with Scott, it's like you're listening into a conversation with two friends that can educate you. And it's such a powerful force, Brandon. Like it's wild because you could be literally, as I say, that only human interaction for one person.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. There is an expression that you are the amalgamation or you are the average of the five people you spend the most time with. And I think that in today's society, a lot of us are working from home or you and I operate online businesses. So do we really interact personally, in person, face to face with five people? I'll tell you personally, I don't. I have my partner, Jane, who is in this space, but obviously we live together. And I have a few other close friendships, but I moved across the country and I'm in a completely different place than my closest friends, my closest family. Obviously, I have interactions with them through calls and through other forms. But a lot of times, some of my closest contacts and people I talk to daily, an example, like I'll share later, some of the lessons I've learned. One person in particular is Eric Helms, Dr. Eric Helms. And that is someone I talk to multiple times a week. He has become a good friend, a confidant, someone I bounce ideas off of, someone that I go to about my career and the direction that I'm going in. And this is someone that he came to the States. He's now in New Zealand. And he came one time and I drove 12 hours to go see him because I wanted to connect with him. I wanted to spend time with him. And that's such a beautiful thing. But at the same time, we are able to surround ourselves with people that we bring on in terms of our guests. We have the blessing that we have a platform that other people want to be on and that we can connect and invite people based on our own selection. But also, I feel that the responsibility aspect is a huge thing. First of all, we have a responsibility to put out adequate information and really educate people and put them in a good place because there's so much misinformation and disinformation in the space, but also your inputs in terms of like who you become, like what you surround yourself with, isn't just your social circle in terms of close proximity. It is the media that you take in, it's the information, it's the education, it's the podcasts that you listen to, the books you consume. So if we can be a positive influence on that person and help put them in the right trajectory, especially from a health, a physique, and a fitness perspective, that's not only a responsibility, but that's a huge blessing that we're able to play that role in someone else's life.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because my with the podcast, the voice of bodybuilding, that derives from giving people a voice. So that doesn't mean like matter of speaking and actually that voice. It's someone that's listening and their internal dialogue is empowered because they feel seen, they feel they have a voice, because our internal dialogue is the loudest in any room, right? So we forget that because we listen, as you say, we take on media, etc. We're talking with people. But what we're thinking, if you can, the power of resonation when you're listening to a podcast, when you're almost befriending someone, right? Like we have people across the globe that will feel like they are, a confidant of ours or a friend, as it were, because they listen to us every week and we build that rapport. And then they feel like, okay, there's a safe space here. This is someone that's showing up for me. And there's power in that. And the responsibility part of it, I feel like going back to what you said at the start, the starting a podcast, there's many people that start podcasts to show up consistently, to do this for a number of years like we both have. That in itself, that's a huge commitment. It's a huge, because we say words and we put action behind that. And I am hell bent on showing up every single week, no matter what's going on. I would do my best to be there. But again, that goes back to a responsibility aspect of if we say we're going to put out an episode every week on whatever day or however that looks, Well, we've got to do that because someone could be in a space where that is, they're counting down to that episode. And I'm sure you share that. It's like I would never call it a burden or anything like that, but it's almost like a curse. It's almost like a because you've said, I am here, I'm showing up. And I don't know about you, but my words, what I say, I have to back that up, Brandon. I have to.
100%. So I will tell you this. Initially, I did not want to get into podcasting whatsoever. I had a fear of public speaking. It was something that I associated with my previous career. So I did research and development behind supplement products, and I worked in the sports nutrition industry more in the corporate aspect. So I used to be like a key accounts manager, and I did research and development. So what I would have to do is I'd fly all over the country, and I would give presentations on the product breakdown, what each ingredient did, the specs on it, the information, the transparent labels, all that. And my biggest accounts were a big international vendor called iHerb, and then also bodybuilding.com. So I used to get flown out over the place. Now that sounds exciting, don't get me wrong, but it was very long trips. First and foremost, there was a lot of analytics, dollars and cents, spreadsheets, and things like that. But also, all the presentations I did were generally in front of 300 to 400 people. So they gave me immense anxiety, to be honest with you. So when people would ask me in my spare time, hey, can you come on this podcast? It's 2017, 2018, 2019. I was like, I would just skirt around it. I was very busy. And I kept having clients that would get on calls with me and we would do consultations and I would take 30 minutes and I would educate them on things. I did a lot of writing at that time. So I was writing for bodybuilding.com. I was writing for men's fitness publications. So I was doing a lot of written work and people were reading that and I was sending it over to them. I've been published in like Alan Aragon's Research Review. And they always asked me, man, I wish this was an audio medium. So I kept having clients ask me, hey, can you do this? Well, there was like a kickoff where in my supplement role, they kept putting me on camera, which I was completely uncomfortable with, but it was something that they would bring a media crew and then they put me on the spot to explain nootropics or how I lived my lifestyle. And they would sometimes like document portions of my prep from like a supplementation aspect perspective. And my clients used to see that online. And so I did a series with bodybuilding.com and my clients loved it because I explained what I was doing. And at that time, bodybuilding.com was having all of their articles ghostwritten, meaning that if you were an athlete and they were giving a feature, someone else would write your training program, your diet design, all that kind of stuff. That was very prominent at that time. And luckily, because I have an exercise, I have a nutritional science background, and they had interactions with me from a corporate perspective. They used to say, Brandon, you can write your own stuff because I used to do all the writing, like all the product descriptions on the website for the company I worked for, NutriBio at the time. So I didn't have a ghostwriter. So I was writing these things and then I was speaking through them. And my clients were able to see that when bodybuilding.com wasn't behind a paywall. And so they kept asking me, my clients again and again. So when COVID happened, I said, listen, for the time period that I'm not traveling, I will do one podcast a week because I had a bunch of requests. So I literally just opened up like the folder in my inbox and I just started emailing people back. And I did that. And then once I started the show, I continued that. So it's been 6 years, pretty much one podcast a week at least. And I have like 500 plus podcasts at this point. And it all came from that commitment to my clients. When I initially started this, I genuinely did not think that anyone else but the 50 or 60 people I was working with at that time were going to listen. And here's the thing. I was completely fine with that. I felt that this was a way for me to check in with them, to reinforce the information and the adjustments that I was making with them. I wanted them to have a resource because, as you very well know as a coach, there are times that you have a conversation with a client and it's pertinent, it's very important. You're trying to get across a concept to them. So in my case, I work with a lot of women and a lot of people with chronic dieting histories. And I'm trying to get across to them, listen, you may have the desire to get leaner and want to diet, but physiologically and psychologically, you're not in the position to do so. So we need to pull back, we need to take a step back, really zoom out and look at the big picture and put your physiology in a position where you're primed to cut in the future. But now is not that time. Well, when I'd have those conversations, I found myself again and again and again, and it wasn't getting through. But when I did a podcast, I could release that and it was evergreen, meaning that when that particular client was ready to listen and ready to hear my message, they could go back to it. So in that moment, in that check-in, maybe they didn't hear me out. They didn't want to read the information. They wanted to go back and forth. But eventually they were able to go back and say, Brandon, I listened, and this was a feedback that I got. Hey, I listened to what you said and how you put it. And, in podcasting, we get repetitive. We do the same topics again and again, but sometimes it's just the ability to communicate better, first and foremost, and then to almost recalibrate the way that we talk about a concept, that we describe something. We get better at more eloquently summarizing something and providing. That's why the show was called Chasing Clarity. I wanted to provide clarity on complex and confusing topics that people were caught up in, that they were held back by, or that they were genuinely confused about. And so this was my effort to do so to give back to the industry. And now it's transitioned to like when I see some of the analytics sometimes, and it's not about that, but sometimes I look and I'm like, wow, I've reached people all around the world and it's tens of thousands of people tuning in. And it's just a blessing from God first and foremost. But it all goes back to like, what was the intention? My commitment was to my clients. They were the ones that they were a part of my team. I wanted them to feel part of a community. And it started like such a small thing and it's built up to something so much greater. And I think that's a blessing that we've been able to turn something that maybe initially felt like a burden. It felt like a responsibility. I remember the first 50 episodes or so, I was getting anxiety attacks before I did every one. And I used to think to myself, man, I don't know if it's worth this discomfort, but it was because by pushing through that discomfort, I was able to shed light. I was able to empower people through education. And I was able to really reinforce a lot of the things that maybe my clients weren't hearing in that specific check in with me that week, but they eventually were able to hear me long term.
And in turn, you're empowering yourself. Like that's a huge part for me. And when you talk about that, it resonates because that's almost what's formulated over my time of podcasting. So when I started podcasting, it was I would listen to podcasts, and being a female in the bodybuilding space, I would listen, and it's very male dominant. Maybe there's more females now, but I still feel there is a dominance in the bodybuilding industry. And I'd listen and think there's not much about females in particular, so I'd feel a bit like I'm sort of listening to bros having a chat, and I don't really feel like I fit in here, so I'm listening. And then I found some, and then I felt like, and I love where you say chasing clarity, and that's why your podcast is called that. I would feel overwhelmed with the information because I didn't know anything. This was me starting out, and I have no background in anything. So I was like, I'm so overwhelmed with the information, but I want to get better. But there's not, it's like there's no bridge in there. It's like you either listen to one where you're completely lost, or you should listen to something that's very superficial, and that's not me. So I'm like, where do I, find the podcasts that are for me? And I'd be walking along, and then quite literally over a few different walks, I was like, could I start a podcast? Oh God, no, no, surely I can't. I can't. Surely I can't be that person. And it took me 6 months, so very similar to you, to sort of formulate the courage almost to do this and do this regularly. And I was looking at names, I was looking at, if they're trademarked, if I can get a website, all of these different things. And I did, so I wanted 2 words like yours, and I put down a load of different words and I was joining them up, and I was like, beyond condition, because your worth is beyond condition, right?
Mhm.
And you've spoken about, okay, so ladies that are tied to serial dieting, very, very common. That's just one example in our space. And it was like, I think this is it. I think this is it. So I start the podcast, and then I'm doing it. I'm building the courage, and I'm feeling better and better. But I mean, the first episodes, Brandon, if I was to listen, I don't think I could listen back. I would rehearse the intro. I would, and I'd build my own anxiety when actually I'd hit record, and the intro would be completely different to what I practiced. So I made myself anxious because let's face this, right? And I believe you're going to be the same. The anxiety is formed because we want to do well. We want to do this position we are in is one we hold with pride. And that is the weight, and that is the anxiety we can almost carry ourselves and create, right? The pending sense of doom.
100%. I will say that I've actually spoken through, I have panic disorder. So I've dealt with this for quite some time, anxiety related issues. And I will say this, I've actually particularly spoke through with counselors about my anxiety around public speaking because I really want to know the root cause essentially. And it's when you have anxiety or you have stress or you feel nervous about something, it's all the same sympathetic nervous system response. Excitement, stress, anxiety, rumination, these all have a very similar sympathetic response in terms of your catecholamine release. You're getting adrenaline, noradrenaline, then cortisol is going off. And I really wanted to know the root because when I get to speaking, it's not like I choke up. It's not like I don't have words. If you ask me a question, I'll be able to eloquently walk you through the process. I understand physiology very well. And the particular things, and I'll say this very frankly, I only stay within my domain of expertise. I don't speak outside of it. When I get questions that it's way outside of my scope, something I'm uncomfortable with, I will very blatantly say, hey, that's not within my scope of practice. It's not something I'm well versed on. Or if it's something that has just come up, a new paper or a new study, I will say, listen, I have not read into that. I have not looked into that, but I can look into it for you just at this current time in my career and in my life, I'm just not well aware of that. I'm not going to fib about something or pass off that I have information that I don't. So I really stay within my scope of expertise and practice. But with that, the nervousness wasn't coming from imposter syndrome. And I think that a lot of people do have that. They get on before they're ready, or they give information that they actually do not have. They do not have that domain specific expertise, but they speak outside their expertise. They suffer with something called expertise creep, which is when you take your prominence, your popularity, and your knowledge on one particular topic. So this very much happens in academia. So when someone has a PhD in something, often because they're looked to as an illuminary in a certain field, they use that and leverage it in a different field where they talk outside of their scope or outside of their actual area that they're very well versed on, but they're very convincing because A, they're confident, and B, people look at them, it's like an appeal to authority. They have
Yeah.
this degree or they're very intelligent. So they use that. And unfortunately, that can be often weaponized because they may be presenting on something that they have no experience on, or they haven't read the data well enough, or they haven't walked through with people in the trenches, and then they influence people to take different methodologies or strategies or to change their mindset on something. And for me, it was never about that. I did not come from like a imposter syndrome. I was coaching for so many years. I started coaching in 2010. I went online in 2013. So I was kind of early to the online space. So by the time I get on a podcast in 2020, it's like, man, you've been at this 10 years. Like, this is all I do. This is all I talk about. Like, I could have these conversations with people on a day-to-day basis, but I could only do it one-on-one, face-to-face at that time. And really what it came down to, and this is something that you were alluding to, is that I truly care. We get nervous, we get anxiety because we care, first of all. Secondarily, we want to make sure that what we're putting out is accurate, that we are showing up as the best version of ourselves, that we are, say, a positive time period in that person's day. Because I'll tell you personally, I am slammed day in and day out. And I understand I work with a lot of busy executives, other business owners, and people in like Silicon Valley and in corporate positions. And time is a very finite, resource. And so anytime I think about, hey, is someone going to tune in this for an hour? This better be jam packed with information. So I put excess pressure on myself to show up. And I also really do try to get across information that is going to be eye opening to people, because there's so much misinformation, so much disinformation in the space. And I have so many people, and I'm sure you're in the same position, where you have clients that are coming to you, they're confused, they're overwhelmed, they feel like they're being pulled in all these different directions, they don't know who to listen to, and they constantly feel like this internal anxiety about not doing the right thing. And I wanted to create a resource that people could come back to. They could, where I would walk through concepts, I would talk about the research, I would go through my rationale, my reasoning, and then also discuss the practical application. But that put a lot of pressure on me, because I said, I constantly want to up the ante. I want to continue doing better, and I want to continue bringing on guests. And I also, this is just personally, I do a lot of research based episodes. There's a lot of preparation for that, because I never want to disrespect that researcher. When I have someone come on and they're presenting something, there have been particular talks that I've done with Scott, or particular topics that I know he's done full presentations on for other venues. And I'm like, he would usually, and I'm always willing to, like, Scott knows this. I would be more than willing to pay him to come on the podcast, because I know he charges for this information. And Scott is so gracious, and we have a good relationship, that that's never an issue. But I don't want to come unprepared and disrespect him by taking his time and then relying on him. Like, there's a lot of podcasters that they do no prep work. They show up very unprepared and unprofessional. And then they put that guest on the spot. And it's almost like that guest has to do a monologue. And it's almost like, hey, man, this is like a interactive type of medium. And so that is where my anxiety comes from. And I still get it to this day, but I get it to a lesser degree because I've done it so many times. But I've realized that by pushing through that discomfort, it has led to so many other people benefiting, that's a stronger why and a stronger push than the pull is to not do it.
And I mean, what you've just said there, and being able to be vulnerable essentially around how anxiety does affect you, that in itself, and people listening, that resonation that I spoke about is exactly that. Okay. You've been doing this for so many years. You've got such a background of so many different roles in your life that bring, elements of power and connection, and what you've done in your life. But how many people can listen to a podcast and go, yeah, I get that. That's me as well. And actually, this person speaking on the podcast, well, look, you're sitting here, you've shown up for other people, the higher purpose, and seeing that blessing in pushing into discomfort. And that, for my podcast, and from listening yourself,
Mhm,
a lot of what I speak about is the mental health side of things,
mhm,
because that sort of was where the niche that and I feel like it's come over time where my niche sits. and the vulnerability from the guests that come on. But that's from, of course, when we present and we host a podcast, that's from offering a safe space to a guest as well. And again, that's another, power, as it were, not power hungry, but a power that we have found that we didn't really probably know existed for ourselves. And every time I have someone come on the podcast that, I talk to people in depth, and they're sharing their story. But some gratitude for you, Brandon, for being able to talk about that because it's huge. And the thing is, it's males and females, right? And for me, and Scott is so on board with this. Men talking about emotions, that's huge for me. That is huge because we're all human, and this is what it led to, and what I wanted to share. We've learned that we can be human, we can be vulnerable, and that is respected in our industry. I'm sure you'll agree.
100%. I think that we were speaking off air about having integrity in your presentation and truly displaying who you are, because unfortunately, there's a lot of people that hide behind not only a narrative, but almost like a presentation of themselves. So everything is very coordinated, it's pre planned, it's predetermined, and it's almost dressed up. And I told you a story, and I'll share it here. There's been several occasions that I've went to seminars, and I've been so excited to meet some of the people on the panel. I've been blessed in the fact that they've brought me out to those seminars to speak on that same panel. So now this is somewhat like a colleague, and I've had the same experience with someone like a Scott or an Alan Aragon. I've had great experiences because they are who they say they are. You speak with them, whether it be about a topic, or you speak with them in terms of just like, hey, how are you? Let's talk about your family. Like, I'm truly interested in these people. I mean, I have the fondest memory of the last time I did a seminar with Scott. Like, I was actually on the panel with Scott and Alan. It was in Tampa, Florida. So that was quite far from all of us, except for Scott. He was living there at that time. And after, there was like an after party where all the presenters went, and they didn't really want to do that. If you know Alan and Scott, they're both in their 50s. They're just in a different place in their life. And I asked them, listen, would you want to go for dinner? And so I brought him out for sushi dinner, and we stayed. And I don't eat sushi, so I just want to be transparent. I was in a photo shoot prep at the time. I literally brought my food, ate it in the car, and then sat with them for 4.5 hours. And we talked about Scott going to Germany to do his study abroad when he was in college. We talked about all about Alan Aragon, like how he was in practice in Los Angeles. And then he had these like 3 career arcs where he was essentially initially a personal trainer in the 90s. Then he went into being a nutritional counselor. And then in like 2010 to 2012, he decided to become a researcher, and he created that Alan Aragon Research Review. And, that's essentially his role now. And it was such a great thing because we not only spoke about their accomplishments, but also their challenges, their setbacks. I had a deep human connection with them, which I've shared, and I still communicate with them, both of them, on a somewhat frequent basis, especially, given the fact that they're super busy and they're people that have a lot of responsibilities and they're in different stages of their lives. But the thing that I want to get across is that a lot of times who people present themselves with online, especially in a podcast form, is not who they are. So I've had the opposite examples, and I was giving you a little bit of a recap. I've had several conferences that I went to, and I've been very excited with people that are very deep into physiology. They do research-based podcasts, and they're talking all this different stuff. And a very particular example was a person that did a full like hour plus deep dive on hypothalamic amenorrhea. That's a topic I'm very intimately familiar with. It's something I help women a lot of times with menstrual cycle restoration. And the real reason for that is I had my first prep, which was well over 10 years ago, it was 2014. My girlfriend at that time decided to do it with me, but she was not going to get on stage. She wasn't interested in bikini, but she wanted to go through the process. Now, mind you, male and female physiology is much different. Female physiology is much more sensitive to perturbations and energy availability. And so we go through this process, and I get stage lean for the first time. She got like, we would say under 20% body fat, but not peeled. She would have looked like a 2014 version of a bikini
Okay.
competitor, which at that time was lean, but it was like kind of beach lean, you know what I mean? Almost like a fit model now. And so she got lean. And unfortunately, throughout the process, towards the latter portion, she lost her cycle. And so, a month goes by, 2 months goes by, 3 months goes by. And, she finally tells me, this was not something she was openly telling me about. She finally tells me, hey, it's been like 2 or 3 months since I had my cycle. So I suggested, we were working with different coaches at that time. I worked with an old school bodybuilding coach in a gym that I would see in person. And she was working with someone that owned a large prep company at the time. He's still in the space, but he's quite older. And it was basically one of those big bikini brands that was very prominent in the States. And so she asked him about it, and he said, oh, that's normal. And so she gets through. He's like, it's normal. It goes away, after you finish the diet. So she finishes the whole thing. At that time, there really wasn't reverse diets, but she stayed on coaching with him. So he took her. This was, you can hear, I guess, my discouragement or disappointment in this. He took her from a cut to a bulk. So like just rapidly increased, or she's rapidly overshooting in body fat, but her cycle didn't come back. And so another 3 month package goes by. There's nothing. She's asking about it. And he's just like, hey, listen, sometimes the time course is different for individuals. He didn't explain any of the physiology going behind it. And finally, we get 6 months into her not having a cycle. And she comes to me. And at that time, I'm already coaching people. I already had an online business. But to be completely frank with you, it was mostly men. I was coaching like males and I was coaching Gen Pop women in like a gym. So like I just didn't have the experience with the female physiology. And she asked me, and luckily I have a physiology background. And I went to a textbook and I tried to learn the menstrual cycle. And I went through this whole process. And luckily, thank the Lord, there was a consensus statement in 2014 by the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, on relative energy deficiency in sport. Now, my girlfriend at that time had been a high level athlete in college. And so there were some underpinnings. And I started looking into that literature and realizing the the relationship between energy availability, especially when we look at energy availability, your energy intake minus your exercise energy expenditure divided over your fat-free mass. So she had a lot of muscle. She had lower body fat, a little under 20% body fat. She also was on a very low carb diet. He had her on ketogenic diet. And we know that low carbohydrate availability docks in the receptors in the brain and downregulates thyroid production. It downregulates luteinizing hormone pulsatility, and that has disruptions at the menstrual cycle in terms of actually stimulating ovarian sex hormones and then also shutting down reproductive function. And so I was able to restore a cycle. It took a very long time. So that was the first time, but it was something I was very intimately familiar with. I've worked with many women on. So I go to this conference and I'm super excited because this dude did a deep dive. And at that time, I'm thinking, I'm one of the only other guys talking about this in the space. So I go up to him. I'm super excited. And I start going through some papers. I'm talking about the most recent International Olympic Committee's consensus, which was in 2023. And I'm talking about Mary DeSouza's work and all this stuff. And these were things that he had cited in the podcast. And you could tell he was kind of thrown off. And I just thought I was like too much for him, which, I have ADD. I'm a very hyper person. And so he pulls me aside and he says, hey, man, I did that podcast and I remember it. And I looked through some of the material, but I'm just going to be honest with you. I have a full team and I have someone that does research. I have 5 people on my team, someone that does research, someone that does like the script writing. I have someone that helps with, like, I have a producer that helps with the sound quality. Um, I just don't know that topic in depth. And I just want to be transparent because I can tell you're really into this and you know this stuff. And I'm not going to be able to talk to you about this. And so I kind of just sat back and I respected it. And I said, thank you. But it just stayed with me that whole weekend. And we were on panels together and stuff. And I just felt, man, that is such lack of integrity and it's so disingenuous. And it kind of like burned me up inside. And there's been many interactions like that over the years where I found that the person, how they present themselves online isn't who they are in person. And podcasting is one space. And this, I told you off here, I was like, listen, I don't edit any of this. It's going up. If I can't do it in one take, I don't do it. And that's just to be intellectually honest. It's also because I'm not good with editing, to be completely frank. But really, we're given an opportunity to really show ourselves to the world, who we are, what we stand for, and really our ethics, our morals, our values. And when people trust us, that's a huge responsibility. And that's something that we shouldn't take advantage of. And luckily, like someone like you and I are very genuine. We're not trying to be influencers, we're coaches, we're practitioners. We're really just trying to reach people and be a positive influence on their life. And this is a great space to do so. And then also to expose our audience to other people like that, because we're able to have the discernment to decide, there's some big people in the space that they can get like more eyes to our podcast, but we may not be aligned with them intellectually, integrity wise, ethically. So it's a very calculated process of running a podcast and doing it well to the point where you really do educate people. You bring on the right guests, but you also stay in alignment with like why you started in the first place. Like disregard the views, disregard like any advertising and any marketing. Like, I'm sure you get hit up all the time, as do I, people pitching us guests and pitching us ads. And it's like, I did this for the purpose not to make money. Like I lost money doing this, like jumping on, spending all this money off the bat. It was a huge investment. I used to think to myself, like those first 50 episodes, I'm like, man, there's nothing coming back, because it wasn't about getting a financial reimbursement. It was more so like you're doing it, you're grinding, and you're like, man, this is really uncomfortable. I feel super like uneasy, like doing this because I'm anxious about speaking in public. And then you're not getting a lot of feedback because your audience is so small, your reach is so small. But then there's like this domino effect where you get like a season in and you're like, wow, this is so much more than I could ever imagine. And then it just keeps building, keeps building, keeps building. And it's such a beautiful thing because we can literally connect, create relationships, and educate people around the world.
Yeah, yeah. It's like when I think back, I'm like, wow, and this is part of my own. I feel like my own sort of place in the world. Like I often think about this from a young age. I always thought, I think there's something I can be good at. I think there's something I can be good at. I feel like I'm a good person, I'm putting out the positive vibes, as it were. Life hasn't been easy, I won't lie, but I've kept showing up and I've kept going. And when you're then in this position, and this is the thing, and I wanted to ask you about this, you get, because as you touched on, you get the marketing people, you get the emails from YouTube and whatever else, because I'm on YouTube as well, as you know. But you also get people that try and there's a calculated reason behind it. And I've actually been, I don't know what the right word is, to be honest, Brandon, but I've had people essentially befriend me because of my position with the podcast. And I've been through some quite, and I don't talk about them on the podcast, as it were, but as a brief outline, it's like I've been in some positions where I think, wow, I've actually almost been manipulated here. And it is by some people in the space, like you say, they're not the people they put out. And you think that they are, you connect with people, you speak with people. But my process, my preparation for podcasts, and this is why, if anyone says to me, should I start a podcast? I'm like, I'm not gonna lie, this is what it takes. I don't accept invites. I've had a couple of people that I've connected with and I've sort of, kept it in my messages and thought, okay, maybe we'll see here and what the connection's like. But to find the right guests, like you say, that are authentic and match our principles, because I'm not here for it. The people that are dicing with people's health, that are saying they're specialists, that are way in deep. And the thing is, it's the paycheck. I'm so far away from that, Brandon, as you know from listening to the podcast. But we have to be, and as I say, I wanted to ask you, quite careful sometimes with who we actually let into our space because we now have a reputation of having our podcast, if you know what I mean.
100%. So I will say this. I've had to be more and more intentional on the selection process and then how I filter people. Because I'll tell you this, I built this podcast only doing solo episodes. So I built the audience, I built the trust. If you look at through my first 75 episodes, there's maybe 6 guest episodes, and they were all people that I knew in person that I had done consultation calls with. The only person I had not met in that first 75 episodes was Dr. Bill Campbell, who I have a great relationship with. He's a man of God. Like we have like a faith-based connection. And so initially I would never do the guest episodes. And it's interesting as I have a friend that's very prominent in the podcasting space in a different vector. So he's like more in like the business and in the motivational interviewing type aspect. Like this guy has tens of thousands of reviews on Spotify and iTunes. Like he does podcasting as a career. He's a good friend of mine. Like I jump on calls with him. I've never had him on the show, but just because and I've never been on his show. And the reason for that is that we're in completely different sectors. So it doesn't even make sense, but we have personal conversations, which, one day I'll have to record because they're quite interesting. But he has given me a lot of advice, marketing advice and, lead magnets and stuff for the podcast. And he does this as a career. So I completely respect it. And I appreciate some of the insights he gives me, especially he's helped me with like looking at analytics and really seeing trends and patterns of like topics and like how to, what could I double down on? That's been hugely influential. But I will say this, I built this platform off of my own info, and really it was just for my clientele. I will say this from day one to the day end. You go to the first podcast, and it was essentially about being a good influence in this space and creating change. And I literally, you'll hear it on the first episode. I'm talking about my health-centric coaching model. I'm talking about how I'm really doing this to empower people through education, to bridge the gap between research and practical information and application. And it was just for my clients. So I wasn't looking to really reach people. Whereas my good friend that's in the podcasting space in a different vector had told me since day one, dude, if you want to grow, you have to get guests on right away and you have to leverage their audience. And I just didn't want to take that approach. So I didn't have to become reliant on that. But when it comes to guests, I've had a lot of people proposition me or try to leverage me. And I'm going to give you a good case. I had someone that's very prominent in the business coaching space that had reached out, and we had a lot of mutual friends. And this is my own naivety. We had a lot of conversations and stuff, and it was through like DM and through Messenger and stuff. And I thought we had a good connection in terms of like, we were very aligned with many things. And I go to meet her in person, and it was at an event that I didn't know she was going to be at. And so she didn't know I was going to be at either. So I go up to her, and she honestly didn't know who I was. and I had a kind of a weird response because I went up. I'm a very friendly person, so like if I meet you in person, I'm gonna come up and like hug you and like introduce myself and like I'm someone like you're not gonna miss me. I'm 6'3", like it's gonna be noticeable. And it was very clear that she had never spoken to me, and it was someone in her DMs that runs her social media. I had no idea, to be honest with you, and that was a really good learning lesson because she had positioned herself to get on the podcast. And I said, listen, you know what? We'll continue talking. I'm not bringing on a guest right now because I build out the seasons way in advance. And now I've done it a little bit differently. Like I have the rest of from here till end of September already filled out. I already had the episodes done. And then I kind of drop like bonus episodes. So we'll coordinate a time and a date and we'll drop a bonus episode there. But really, I do so many of these things so far in advance that a lot of times if I'm going through a busy season in life like I was then, I'm not booking people until months later. And so I had that interaction. I thought to myself, thank God that I had discernment not to book her right then and there because she had a good profile. She has a large influence. She speaks with a lot of other coaches. She works with a lot of other coaches because I really wasn't talking to her. So who was going to come on the podcast? I don't know who it was going to be because when I met her in person, she wasn't that friendly. And now, mind you, I do give her the benefit of the doubt because she generally didn't know that we had conversations until I said something. And then she was open and transparent. But she should not have put herself in that position to have someone contacting other people in this space and propositioning herself to be on their platforms and this, that, and the other. And that's happened multiple times where I've had to really think to myself, and there's been certain opportunities that I've had where people have offered to come on and they have big platforms and they're people I really like their stuff. But sometimes what it feels like, and if you listen to their podcasts or podcasts that they're on, it's sales pitch after sales pitch after sales pitch. And it's almost like they're inserting like marketing the whole time about this product that they work on. And this, they're constantly trying to get people in this like lead magnet. And that was never the intention of this. Like for the first like 200 episodes, I didn't even plug my own coaching. You know what I mean? It was never a thought on my mind. So, I think it's very important, first and foremost, for us to be very selective, but also to realize that not our responsibility isn't only to show up and deliver information to people, but if we are going to put someone on our platform and share that platform with them, that is all the trust that we have garnered, for me over the last 5 years and then 16 years of my career. If I bring someone on, my audience is automatically thinking this is a trustworthy source. This is someone Brandon trusts, and this is someone he endorses. And I'm fortunate that in the last couple years, since I've made some redirections in the podcast, I'm not ashamed. I'm not regretful of certain podcast guests, but there are some in the past where there have been, can be completely frank with you, there's 2 episodes I can remember that I did not publish. And I reached out to that person. I was very honest and forthcoming to both these individuals. I had asked them to come on and I thought we had a certain type of relationship. And one time they kind of went off on like a rampage on, it was kind of like a very passionate rant and it spoke about people in such a negative manner that I just didn't want the negativity because some of the people they spoke about, I do have relationships with, I do know. And the other time, this person stepped way outside their scope and then was recommending things and propositioning things, even when I was trying to redirect the conversation that after I said, listen, man, we had never discussed discussing any of these things. And that is not something I discuss on my channel. And that is not something like I understand the physiology of these things. It was particular as peptides. I said, you don't even understand the first principles of physiology. I was very frank with him. I literally got off the podcast. We press stop and I told him, dude, I'm not publishing that. And it got a little bit heated, but I'm not going to put that out just because you came. Like I respect someone's time. I don't want to be disrespectful, but at the same time, you took full advantage and manipulated these questions to like plug in this peptide and that peptide. And it was like, we're not even talking about anything in that vector. So I think it's very important that we look through the person, we discuss with them. And one thing I've also done, and I don't, this is a piece of advice if you haven't done this, sometimes I've just jumped on a call with someone. I've had interactions and we've been messaging back and forth. And then there's sometimes I'm like, hey man, or to the person, I'm like, dude, I would love to jump on a call and just get to know you. And I do it through Zoom and I send them a Zoom link and then I've had them on later. And that's been a great opportunity. And then the other thing I've done is I've had many people on after I've met them at an actual conference. I've spent time with them. I've pulled them aside and I've had conversations. Actually, I went to a conference last year and I got 4 podcast guests from that I was interested previous to that. Some of them, they had too big of a profile that's very hard to get through social media because they have like a management team. And then other people, it was that I thought they were who they were. Like I thought that their information was great. And I wanted to know, does the person match the information? And they did. And that became a connection where some of these individuals, they live out in Australia, New Zealand, these particular people, they're going to be coming to Nashville next year. And I'm going to go to a seminar just specifically to meet up with them. And we're going to podcast when we're there. So like, I think doing it a little bit more intelligently and a little bit, maybe it takes more work off the bat, but I've been able to create deeper connections, relationships, and also trust that what they bring to my audience is something that I can get behind, and then I can be completely confident when I launch that podcast.
Yeah, yeah. I hear you. My podcast listeners will be going, wow, wow, this is what Sarah talks about. Because, and I've built some of my deepest friendships through podcasting.
Mhm.
I've met, and I'm like, wow, the podcast bodybuilding for me has almost been a funnel of success, but then the podcast has come from bodybuilding and building, in the space and who I know. And I wonder if you get this as well. And it feels like it's similar to what you're talking about there. When I try and articulate who I'm looking for and what guests I would reach out to. I call it right up my street, the vibe. I
Mhm.
get like this, I get this pull. And sometimes someone's reel or something will pop up on Instagram and I watch it. I think, okay, I like this person, I like this vibe. Then I'll scroll back through their profile. I'll try and look at, if we've got any common people that we both follow, etc., etc. And I can almost tell from the first message if the vibe is real. And by the time we get to the podcast, it's like we're friends. And then off the back of that, and this is what I find, and I wonder if you get this as well, because I share a lot of competitor journeys, I, bring people on and we talk about the deep, dark nature of their story and their journey after the podcast. I remember the first time this ever happened to me, Brandon. I was like, I thought, whoa, I feel like I've completed my life here. And I always remember this. And perhaps this is what you're talking about also. When one of my guests, and it's someone I respect heavily in the industry, he was like, I've never met someone with emotional intelligence like yourself. That's the best podcast I've ever been a guest on. And I was like, okay, I feel like I'm doing something right here. This was quite early on. And ever since then, it's like I've been backed by reality to so many guests have messaged me after. People that are at the height of their field, psychologists, food disorder specialists, like people that I respect heavily. And they message me and say, that's the best podcast I've ever been part of. It was just very different to what I've done before. And I really liked how genuine you are and the emotional intelligence that you put across. And I thought, wow, so this has actually helped me become a better person, a better coach, a better bodybuilder. It's this funnel to success, and the podcast for me is so much deeper than. And as you said earlier, I've actually put money into this rather than made money from it, and I will absolutely rightly do that for the foreseeable. But yeah, that I don't know. It's like an intuition, and then maybe that connects with the emotional intelligence that perhaps we both share to be able to do this.
No, absolutely. I think there's two things I want to hit on. So first and foremost, there is when you truly do this and you enjoy doing it, you don't bring someone on and you just throw them questions, and it's not a deliberate interaction where you're truly invested, because there's been many podcasts, I'm sure you've been a guest, where they ask you a question, they're typing on their phone or they're doing emails or something. They're not locked in. I'm truly like fascinated by my guests and what they're saying. And I want to, sometimes I'm interrupting them and that's my ADHD going off, but it's because I'm like at the edge of my seat. And I think initially when I first started bringing on guests, I thought to myself, this is an opportunity for me to share someone that is better than me at a particular topic. So one of the first episodes I ever did with a guest was Alan Aragon, who I've had a relationship with personally since 2006. I started on the forums with him. And then later on, I was learning from him. It's 2006. I'm a few years into my training career. And then as he got into research, I would interact with him and we would email back and forth. And then we created a friendship. And then eventually, when he decided he was going to get back into the podcasting space, I was one of the first people that he came on and did one with. Then we've done seminars together and we still keep in contact. And I thought to myself, I want to talk about all things protein overfeeding. I want to talk about metabolic adaptation. And I said, I'm very well versed in these topics, but who do I know that's better? Like, I want to platform someone that is more of an expert at this than me. And the first person I thought of was Alan. So I brought him on. It was like episode 10 or 12. And I'll always remember that conversation because I've sent it to so many other people. Initially, it was not, I didn't think of it as for my benefit, to be completely frank with you. I was like, listen, I could cover these topics, but I wouldn't do them justice to the same degree as other people. And then this has become more of an intellectual outlet for me, an emotional outlet, where I've been able to bring people on that I have an emotional connection to. So many of the podcasts that I've had with Scott, like we've dug into the weeds. The first one we ever did together was on response heterogeneity, meaning the individual differences in people from a hypertrophy training perspective, male and female differences, sexual dimorphism, but also the disparate, like the spread of hypertrophy results that we see in certain populations, like the Hubel and colleagues study, where some people are gaining 17% of lean body mass and some are like 50%. And this, we have hyper responders and then what would be categorized as non-responders, but they're just poor responders. And so we used to dig in really into the physiology. And then as we got deeper and deeper, I started thinking, man, I have so many great conversations with Scott about completely different topics on our normal consultation calls, because we used to do a consultation call every Friday. And I used to spend every Friday with Scott. I was a single guy. Like I was super into this. And every Friday night, we would spend our whole evening together, 2, 3, 4 hours. And so I asked him one day, I said, listen, I would like to talk like on a topic that is a little bit different. And I just want to have you on, and it doesn't have to be pre-prepared. Like I want to shoot the shit. And it was about an article he had written that was very influential in my life called Rust Proofing the Iron Warrior. It was on Elite FTFs in 2014. I've referred back to that topic more than you can think of. And what we discussed in that podcast was longevity, was I'm looking at progressive overload as a vector for inspiring change across your life, like always upping the ante. So that is both in the gym, it's in your diet, it's in your relationships, it's in your business, it's in your intellectual pursuits and your education. And that was one of the podcasts I look back on that was recorded well over 2.5 years ago. It has stayed imprinted in my brain because it was such a deeply connecting podcast. So this has become something that I've been able to share with other people. I've been able to educate tens of thousands of people. But at the same time, it has been deeply fulfilling for me. And so, and the other thing with that is that I really do try to ask people things differently than other people have. And that's something I can tell with your podcast. And I want that person to feel as heard by me as they would by every person in this audience. So I think that that is a skill set that you very much have, and that it took me a long time to develop, to be completely frank with you, because I'm a very numbers and science and math and numerically, like analytically based person. So initially it was all about the data, and now it's become a confluence of things, talking about the data, talking about the physiology, but also their practical skills, what they've seen in the trenches, their own experiences. I love hearing about, other people's experiences, how they've applied this to themselves, their own clientele, or, in a research lab. And that has been such a fulfilling part, because I've had a lot of podcasters, other people in the space that I respect to the nth degree, reach out after and say, man, that's one of my best podcasts. I'll give you a great example. There's 2 podcasts that I've done with Eric Helms that have turned into mass articles. And he's told me, reached out after, and he said, dude, that's the inspiration. I'm doing a deep dive and I'm going to write about this in mass for, I can only imagine how many subscribers they have to this, because it's a paid research review. And to have someone you truly respect take a topic that it was questions that you had, it was framed for him, and then write about it in length, it's not only a compliment to me that I asked the right questions and stuff, but that I was able to intellectually stimulate him enough to actually want to dig in deeper. It wasn't something that he dreaded coming on and discussing. He actually truly enjoyed the conversation. Or, I've had people that are very prominent in the space reach out and say, hey, I listened to your podcast, particularly this is actually about Scott. I've had many people that are very high up level in this space that have come to my podcast and listened with episodes with me and Scott and have given me good feedback. And it's like, I know I'm doing something right. It might be only a few people, but it allows me to know that I've taken the time. It's been worth the investment, even if it's just a few people listening, which obviously it's much bigger now, but it's been an absolute blessing. And I think that when you're able to create these connections, you had alluded to the fact that you have some great friendships. And I will tell you this, before I ever had a podcast, there are a few people in this space that continually kept asking me to come on. And I ended up coaching them. I ended up mentoring them. I've seen them through all phases of life. I've coached some of them. I'll give you a particular example. A great friend of mine, his name is Jeremiah Bear, and he has a podcast called Live and Lean. And he was like an OG fitness podcaster. And I have been through every stage of life with Jeremiah, from him bringing me on and us not knowing each other, to creating a great friendship, to coaching him through his wedding and through his honeymoon and all aspects of his life, and mentoring him and his team. And I've seen him go from a 1-person show to having 3 or 4 coaches, having a massive business, incredibly successful. And it all came from accepting an invitation on a podcast and being willing to share with myself, and, taking a few minutes before and after to get to know him rather than just hopping on. I remember he made a comment to me early on, maybe a few podcasts into us recording together. And he was like, man, I just want to thank you. Like, you're so gracious with your time. And he ended up, about a year later, he flew out to a conference to meet me in person. And I couldn't tell you how much of a compliment that was. He brought him and his team to meet me because he genuinely wanted to meet me. And I remember him saying, dude, you're just like you are on Zoom, or, we were recording initially on Skype and then it became Zoom. And at the time I kind of took that weird, and I was like, because I hadn't had these experiences yet in the podcasting space. I was maybe a year into this where I met people and they were completely different. And I remember thinking, yeah, what else was I going to be, dude? I talked to you like I'm literally like on a mic, and but that's not the case. So I think that some of these relationships, I'll give you the example with Jeremiah. I've flown all over the country with this kid. We went to conferences together. I've flown out and visited him and stayed with him. He's done the same, and so these are deep friendships that came from completely different areas of the country. But I'm sure you understand as an entrepreneur, this journey can be lonely. Bodybuilding can be lonely in certain aspects. And I think that podcasting has allowed me to connect with like minded individuals who have sharpened my axe. They have made me better. They've challenged me intellectually. They have caused me to think more critically, but also they've allowed me to level up in ways because it's not just me platforming them. By coming on the podcast, especially when we have prominent people, you've had people at the highest level of the Olympia. They have the faith in you that you have the platform that they want to be on. So that's a compliment in and of itself to you that you have provided and built a space and a community that they say this is worth my time. So it's very reciprocal, and a lot of times you may not see this, but it's something that we do need to acknowledge, be proud of, and just keep building on.
Yeah, I feel like you say there, that offering that space and that it's almost like because I say, it's an honor and it's almost like a duty to serve my community. And what I said this to you at the start of this episode, what I've realized is it's empowered me and I've empowered myself. And I find that, I have these conversations and I think, wow, I'm literally sitting here, as you say, could be a multiple, Olympia title holder or someone that people go, oh my God, you've got this person on the podcast. And we're sitting there just like two friends having a chat, and then we have this interaction after, and they become what I would deem as a friend in the space. And what I found, Brandon, and particularly this year in 2026, the backing for the movement that I've always dreamed of creating in the female bodybuilding space, it's wild to me that this is my reality. I wake up most days and I think I can't believe I am this person because I had this dream all back when I was listening to podcasts thinking I feel like an outsider here. I feel like I'm not good enough. I don't understand what these people are talking about. I want to understand. I want more. I want more. And now I'm this person in the space. And we said before we hit record, I am absolutely not an influencer. I am not an influencer, but I have a place of influence. And like you said, reflecting on and being proud of ourselves. Sometimes I have to remind myself of like I don't know if you ever got this when I do solo episodes and things. I think are people going to get bored of me? Like, am I too repetitive? Do they want to hear about this? Is this the right guess? Am I on the right direction? And we're critical of ourselves, much like with bodybuilding. And I would have these questions and I'd think, I really want to do well here. But then you get backed by reality, and suddenly, almost what was once a delusion in your mind that you could be someone that suddenly you are that person and people and I wonder if you've had this. I've had many listeners that I've met in person, back to what you were saying about meeting people in real life, and they've said straight up exactly what you said there, Brandon. You're the actual real person that you are on the podcast, and I'm like, exactly what you said. Well, who else am I going to be? This is me. Like a lot of my listeners know a lot of my life, a lot of the things I've shared. And I've had people approach me and quite literally break down in tears to say you've changed my life, and it's a motive for me, and I feel it when I say it to you because I feel like you'll understand that. Like to change one person's life, even one, as you said from the very start for yourself, to now change thousands of people's lives. And it's not if they're more muscular than me, if they've got more followers than me. They see me as their equal, as their peer. And my saying is, we rise together. We are quite literally compounding across the female bodybuilding space that we are working on ourselves to rise together and empower each other. And when I have these experiences, you can only imagine, at the first time I was like, I don't know what to do with myself here. Like, I've got literally someone that is saying, you've completely changed the trajectory of my life. I've had the courage to do things in my personal life that you've shared, that you've done. And I took your guidance for a podcast and examples like that. And I mean, it's humbling at best, but that is the reminder that we need to be proud of ourselves, to stay humble and remember, and I say this every single podcast, it's a deep connection. As we said at the start, you're listening in your headphones, right? Like this is we are in a place of influence, whether we like it or not, Brandon, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one thing that I've really learned through my interactions, I've had the great fortune that I've spoken at a lot of conferences in the States, and that's where a lot of my audience is. And there have been people that have shown up. And, I've put this out there and I've invited people, whoever wants to come, and I've had people show up and tell me that they're part of the Chasing Clarity community. And it is such an honor because, I show up every single day just to serve people. I really think that I had a very successful corporate career. And I left that not because I could not do that. I would have been honestly financially free for the rest of my life. I was very successful in that avenue. I did it because I have a deep faith. I felt God had a different calling for me. I had gotten into a point in my career where it was all about dollars and cents, not for me, but I was managing the production and the development of products. And then it became all about sourcing raw materials and making sure bottling prices were on the up and up and looking at, cost, profit loss charts. And it really got me away from what I had originally come into the space to do because I was originally a personal trainer. And then I left the in-person training space to go into a corporate career where I did. That's why I transitioned to online coaching in 2013. I took my clients that I'd worked with in person and I transitioned them online. And I kept working that corporate career for 10 years. And initially, I was working B2B. So going to businesses, I would go in person. I was a traveling sales rep initially. And then as I got higher and higher in my career, it got more and more removed from the actual customer and the actual client and the actual personal interactions and seeing their business thrive. And it became more about how can you make these businesses more profitable? And that was not due to my own choice. It was the skill set that I had. And so when I decided to leave that and go all in on coaching, it was something that those in my circle, both from my colleagues, my work colleagues, and then also my family, were not behind. And I felt called by God to serve a different purpose, to serve people and to be able to empower them through the education that I had garnered, the experiences that I had, and really transform their body and help them look, feel, function, and perform better. And so the podcast almost became another way for me to act as a conduit for that. And so to have people come up to me at these conferences or at these interactions, I've been at shows like national level shows, and I've had people, and sometimes you have interactions with people on social media and you're seeing them in their normal photos. And I've had women come up to me and they're, all tanned up and dolled up and they're like, Brandon, I listen to and I don't recognize them. And it's not because it's that they look that much different. It's like a shock because I didn't expect them at that show. I've had some interesting interactions, but then when they say their name or their username, because sometimes it's through like the
For
Spotify
sure.
comments and you only have one photo that you can see of them. I'm always just so appreciative first and foremost, but then to hear some of the positive feedback that I've had, not only from listeners of the show, but also my clientele. I think that I've had a really great ability to connect more with clients because of this podcast, because it's very hard. And you know this as a coach, you will share personal experiences, but only to a certain degree, because every experience is not going to be appropriate, nor is it going to be applicable to that client. But I will tell you this: early on, when I got into podcasting, I was doing all these guest interviews. They just brought me on for the science. They wanted me to go through the physiology of things and the research papers and things. So I didn't get to tell my story. I didn't get to discuss things I was doing myself. I would not even acknowledge a lot of times because I was all about like, it's about my clients. I mean, I had already stepped away from bodybuilding and I did so because I'll give you this story real brief. The first time I got something to Olympia, it was Men's Physique Olympia. It was 2018. I stood out in that crowd and I watched a good friend and client of mine on the stage and accomplish his lifelong dream. And I had an emotional reaction first and foremost because I saw this kid go through so much. And I remember thinking, sitting in the crowd and thinking, you have a choice. Right now, you prep yourself. You are a selfish bodybuilder and you have clients. And we're in a fork in the road. And you have two options. You continue prepping yourself and doing this half-ass in terms of only being able to take on a certain amount of clientele and also being kind of out of it when you're 4 weeks out, or you decide to give up this endeavor that you love and you go all in on this coaching. And I decided the latter. Because to become quite frank with you, I was a much better coach than I was a competitor. And it was the only aspect of my life personally for me. Bodybuilding was the only selfish thing I had. I've always been someone led to serve, but just not in bodybuilding in certain aspects. And I realized that because there were particular shows where I had a lot of clients that were getting on stage with me. And those were
Yeah.
moments that internally, I never expressed this to them. I never showed it visibly. I was resentful because it was taken away from the attention I needed to, or I thought I needed to place on myself. So once I went and I transitioned to getting away from bodybuilding personally and just focused on my clients and building my business and really pouring into them, I realized it was so fulfilling. But I was able to increase that fulfillment, increase that connection, and really be able to get clients to relate to me more and relate to them by doing the podcast. Because there's a lot of things that we share on a weekly basis about our own process, whether it be nutrition, training, our life. challenges that we face, that we're able to verbally express. You hear the emotion in our expressions and in our statements that we would never be able to get across in a check-in because it's not applicable that week. But sometimes I have clients go back to episodes that I recorded 2, 3, 4 years ago, and they say, right now I'm in that stage of life. And I so appreciate the vulnerability, the transparency, and your thoughts on this because it's changed my mindset. It's changed my perspective. So I think podcasting can be such a beautiful thing. It can educate people. It can empower people. It could change their perspective. And just like I've done that for other people, guests on my show have done that for me. So I think that it's a reciprocal process, something that we're blessed to do. Now, one thing I would like to turn over to you, I do want to do this because I personally want to acknowledge a few people, but I would love to know what are some of the top lessons that you've learned from guests? Because we have been able to learn so much about ourselves, but at the same time, we are in this blessed opportunity that we have the opportunity to access some of the sharpest minds in the industry and things that I'll tell you personally. I used to pay for consultations all the time. I went to conferences all over the place. The first conference I ever went to was a Lane Norton conference in 2013. And since then, the first 5 years of me coaching, I didn't take a dollar. I reinvested into education. I went all over the country. I met Stan Efferding, John Meadows. I've done camps with him, Joe Bennett, everyone you could think of, Scott, all these guys. And I would do that 10 times over if the opportunity was there. But now we can I'm in my office, you could be in your living room and we have access to some of the brightest minds in the world, some of the best athletes. So what are some of the biggest lessons maybe that you've taken away from a few of the guests that you've had on?
I would say one of the biggest things for me sort of relates to what you've spoken about on this episode, where I don't need to be at the level they're at for the topic we're going to talk about. And that relates heavily to, and it's a message that we both share, staying in your lane. That's a huge thing that I talk about on the podcast, on my social media, in any domain. As you mentioned earlier, sometimes clients say, well, I've seen this reel, what do you think? And what have you? And they're overwhelmed. For me, I don't need to overwhelm myself by getting someone on that has a higher level of education in whatever that topic is. And then off the back of that, showing up as myself. And as you rightly said, if we don't know, okay, I don't actually know, about that article, whatever it is we're talking about. But what I will do is have a look at it after this episode. Could you express what you know about it, etc. So again, it's like that leveling of getting specific people on the podcast, finding that vibe, quote unquote, that I speak about, but knowing that you're not an imposter because you're not where they are. Because as podcast hosts, we don't know it all, and that's part of what we're trying to do. We're bringing guests on to share their expertise, but not then having, and this can be deemed as something that happens as a bodybuilder, not having this sort of imposter syndrome, this self-doubt, this self-sabotage or critique that we could record an episode, right? And you could think, wow, I didn't really know much about that topic at all. And I thought I did. That could be a humbling experience, but that's more than okay. Because guess what? Guess what? I'm going to level up here. This is exposing me to where I need to be as an educator, as a coach, etc. And then meeting that with, if you're there, as we are as humans, we are emotionally intelligent. I'd like to, say for both of us that the guest then flourishes. We then flourish because we're not trying to be someone we're not. We're not trying to stroke our own ego. We're doing this for other people, and by proxy, we gain a lot from it. And that you realize actually we are all just human beings, and the right guests that come on for both of us, it humbles you to feel like actually they are a peer. We're all human beings, we're all equal, and we're all here to do the same thing. And we are blessed to find that collaboration, that connection to do that. And I feel like, in life in general, broad stroke, that we can feel maybe we're not good enough, or there's always going to be people that know more than us in certain domains. There's always going to be people that have more followers or whatever. But I've realized that my impact in the space isn't measured by any of those, superficial things, perhaps social media, etc. It's actually measured on changing people's lives and connecting with the people that I collaborate with. And I know that's a lot of lessons that I've learned in one there, but it's almost that, that what I've had for the trajectory across, doing the podcast. Like, yeah, it's humbling at best, but also very, very empowering because I'm in, to be quite honest, Brandon, I'm in the best space in my life from a mindset standpoint. I know that I've earned my respect in the space. I know that I've made mistakes. I know that I would do things potentially differently if I could go back, but I should be allowed to do that. I deserve to make some mistakes as long as I learn from them, and we can only get better. So exposing ourselves to new guests and people that we can connect with, I feel like probably all the guests that we get on, all they expect is for you to be a decent person and to back your words with reality. Then I don't believe many of the guests are going to come on and think that we should be someone we're not. Or I think probably us being quite humble and authentic, it gives a bit of fresh air, I'd imagine, to some of the other podcasts, if you know what I mean.
That is a fact. So, a few things to go off of that because it gives me a lot of food for thought, but also a few things that I'd like to double up on for you. Um, Doing this and seeing the growth from it, but also interacting with people that are at a different level in terms of their years in this field, their academic achievements, either even their athletic achievements. I've had a lot of pro bodybuilders or people that, a great example, Dr. Scott has won Olympias with David Henry, things of that sort, people that I aspire to be like. It has caused me to raise my standard, but it's also caused me to always remember how important it is to have intellectual humility and then to be humble. Because a lot of times, when you first start out, by proxy, by nature, you're humble because you're starting out at ground zero when you start a podcast. But it's very easy, and I'll tell you this personally because I've had many people previously in a different chapter of my life that have blown up on social media and they have hundreds of thousands of followers. They have very large podcasts. And for some of them, I'm so close with. And then others I've distanced myself from because that type of, whether it be notoriety or exposure or growth, has changed them. Or maybe, and I think about this sometimes, I reflect on this, maybe it's exposed who they truly are or truly were or truly wanted to be because there's a lot of narcissism in this space. I say this all the time. I got into this space in 2010 from a personal training perspective, and all I wanted to do was be the best personal trainer. I just wanted to help people. 2013, I transitioned online, and basically the entirety of my adult life has been spent somewhere in this space making a living. But I've done it because I'm truly passionate about it, which is why I had a corporate career for 10 years on the side because I couldn't make a living at this. And always it was about putting other people first. And there's many people in the space as this, especially as this space has grown, and I have these private conversations quite often. This space is more saturated than ever. But I will say this quite frankly, it is not saturated with more good people. It's just more people in general. And a lot of times their intentions aren't pure. They want to get in this for, maybe it's for financial freedom or for flexibility. And they think coaching, they think podcasting is something completely different than it is, which is why a lot of these things have a poor reputation. Like if you tell someone in the common space, hey, I'm a podcaster, they kind of look at you like, oh, you're one of those dudes. Like we both were in this space before it was popular to podcast first and foremost. And we did this not for the AG1 sponsorships and things like that to get marketing and get dollars in the, on the side. But being around people that are very credentialed or very accomplished and they're so humble, and I've had the opportunity to speak with them multiple times on the podcast, but then also meet them in person, has always reminded me, no matter where you go, no matter how much this grows, don't worry about the analytics. Like even when I've had like podcasts that have essentially went viral, it's like you're still the same person. You're going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're going to answer all your clients. You're going to do these podcasts at weird hours of the day, and you're just going to keep it moving. Like life does not change because our intention to get into this was pure and it should stay that way. So that's the first thing. Secondarily, one thing that podcasting, especially from a guest perspective, because keep in mind, I started this just doing it basically myself and just doing solo episodes, was the power of collaboration. And that's what we're doing right now. And I think there's a beauty in this because together we can only accomplish so much, or by ourselves, we can only accomplish so much. And at first I used to think, well, you know what? I don't want to platform anyone else. And there was reasons for that. But I used to think to myself, I can cover this, which a lot of these topics were in my wheelhouse. So I was able to cover them quite adequately. But then I started really taking on the mentality of how did I do things in other realms of my life? How did I do these things in the sports nutrition industry? I used to run a team of personal trainers, all these other aspects. It was through teamwork. And now maybe I don't have a podcast host, which I did at one time have, which was a great collaboration. And even when I went solo, when I started bringing guests on, I almost consider them a co-host for me, especially someone like an Eric Helms or a Lyle McDonald or a Scott Stevenson that I've had these guys on 10 plus times. Like they've become part of the furniture essentially of chasing clarity. And I always remind myself, and a lot of times I express this to them in great gratitude. I'm trying to express appreciation for their time and for their teachings and for their ability to show up and just be who they say they are. By ourselves we can only accomplish so much, but together we can accomplish so much more, and we can reach so much more. And I've been able to reach so many other people's audiences, and they've been able to reach mine, because we developed a friendship that was genuine. We decided to collaborate on things that we're equally interested in, we're passionate about, and we're well versed on. And together we've been able to essentially make these projects. Like, I have certain podcasts that are 2-3 hours long, and it's like, you don't spend 3 hours on, I'm going to give you a good example. I've had podcasts that I've done with Lyle that have taken 6 hours, and I've just divided them up. And it's like, you don't spend 6 hours on a podcast with someone without truly caring about what they have to say, respecting that other person. And like, someone would, term that disrespectful, because they're like, you just took up this whole guy's whole day. He was truly entrenched in this. He was loving it. And so the collaboration aspect, it's taught me in so many other aspects of my life, like, hey, this works across the board, especially when you align yourself with like-minded and good people. That's really what we're looking for. And then the other thing within all that, I will say there's been particular teachings from people that have just stuck out with me forever. So I think maybe one of the most pertinent ones, and something that you will relate to, and this is something I had to learn through the podcast, but I learned through a particular guest, and it's Scott, is that it was a reconceptualization of failure. So when we think about failure and we talk about it in a training perspective, failure in the gym is something we aim for. We want to push ourselves to the point of failure. We do it on purpose. We push a set until we physically can't do anything more. And that's seen as a victory, because it's an ability. It's a shit test, essentially. We are testing our limits and flying close to the sun. I always say this: you have to get close enough to the sun to get burnt, to know how far you can go. And training the failure is an example of that. And that was something that I always did in the gym. And that was through my bodybuilding days. That was a very good, valuable lesson. But sometimes when we look at failure in the gym, especially, we almost put it in a silo. We almost isolate it. And we forget that failure can be something that teaches us in all other aspects of life. And so with the podcast, I'll give you particular, there's been episodes that have flopped. And if I took failure as such a negative pushback and something that caused me to want to avoid it or discontinue, I would have stopped the show many years ago. But I've been able to, based on my conversation with Scott, there's a particular episode I'm thinking of that we discussed failure in detail. And we spoke about how it's not something to be afraid of. It is not something to avoid. It's not something to retreat about. We need to look at all aspects of life where we fail, whether that be a business, a relationship, a opportunity, a podcast episode. Those failures can be learning lessons for us. It can help us approach the same situation or a similar situation in a different way. It could teach us valuable feedback about things that are working and aren't working. So really, like, that was something that I took away from Scott, that it kind of completely reframed things, because in all other aspects of my life, I have like perfectionist strivings and all these tendencies that I've worked through in therapy. And it's like, you know what? You knew in the gym that failure was a good thing. You push yourself to that limit, and you encourage other clients to do so. But there's certain things within this space that I was avoiding failure in. It's like, what's the worst that's going to happen? It's not a loss, it's a lesson. And it's allowed me to go so much further, because I've been willing to fail. I've been willing to fall flat on my face in certain aspects, whether it be on the podcast or in business aspects. And it's also taught me so much about myself, my own resilience, my ability to grow through these things. And the last thing that I'll say about the lessons, and this is something you kind of inspired me to talk about, is you spoke about the fact that you had not went back to your first episodes, and you would kind of like shriek at listening to them. I have listened back, and the reason I did was I wanted to see the growth trajectory. And there's a particular episode, my first episode, gives the intentions of this podcast and what I set out to do. And I thought to myself, all right, you did that on your work break in 2022, and you were slammed, and you only had this very particular time constraint window, and you did it with your podcast host. I want to listen back at that point when there was you didn't have any downloads on your mind. You didn't even know how to look at the analytics. There was nothing. All you wanted to do was do this for your clientele. Are you still living in alignment? Are you still pushing? Like, yes, there should be improvements, but are you still in the same trajectory as that? And I was still in alignment with that. But someone's listening back to some of these older episodes, I realize how much further I've come in terms of my ability to communicate information. There's some podcasts that I did years ago that at that time I was working with a lot of other coaches. So I was speaking at a much higher level that was missing a lot of people in my audience. And it wasn't because I was trying to make people feel dumb or that I was trying to talk over them. It was, I was talking to such a particular and niche avatar that I was working with at that time, which was mostly competitors and advanced coaches, that I was essentially missing the vast majority of the people that actually tune in. Because let's be real, unless it's a podcast like yours where you have these high level bodybuilders that other bodybuilders will listen into, if you're a podcast that's giving education and it's educational episodes, the general populations who's listening in, but it was not landing with them. So I needed to reframe how I educated people, how I communicated the science, I communicated my information. And that has been a learning lesson because as the podcast goes on, I make things simpler and simpler. And if you were to just look at a comparison and look at like the first 50 episodes and then now 250, sometimes some people would look at that as regression. They would say, "Oh, you must have been way smarter back then." No, actually, the ability to simplify things and clarify them in a manner where anyone in the audience is going to take value and gems out of this, from the highest level academic to the highest level competitor to the person that just started their journey 3 years ago. That's actually mastery. Because when you're able to understand something in such a depth that you can explain it in the complex physiological mechanism that it comes behind, and then also in a simplified manner, you not only know that stuff inside and out, but you have the emotional intelligence to communicate that to others.
And that's what we need to remember. And I feel like the solo ones are a perfect example. Sometimes I'll go on a complete tangent because that's how our brains work. I feel like we're quite similar with that. And then I go, wait, hold on a minute. And I verbalize, okay, guys, I realize I've just gone on a massive tangent there. What I'm going to do is trace back. I'm going to talk through it. I'm going to break it down. And we can always learn that. And just before we wrap up, to add to what you said there, and it sparked my mind, is that there's hundreds, I'd say, of certain things that a podcast guest has said to me. It could be a sentence that has completely reframed things in my mind that really has impacted my whole life. There's certain things that it's like they're in my subconscious as a fact and they are always there. And I know what guest it was. I know that I have a photographic memory, and I think from when we before we jumped on, you're very similar remembering things. There's certain things that are literally here always, and the gratitude to that. And anyone listening, any new listeners from your platform, any of my listeners, the gratitude to do this is something I will never ever take for granted. Like the opportunity today to talk to you, it's powering people, empowering collaboration.
100%. Yeah. Before I wrap this up for both of us and I allow you to let listeners know where to follow you, the one thing that I actually had a podcast. So I've recorded, this is my fourth podcast this week, and I do them in batches a lot of times. That I try to, when I am recording, I'm like, listen, I'm going to do it in the span of 2 days and I'm going to get it all in. And then I'm going to go off the map for a few weeks and just focus on clientele and onboardings. And that's just how my mind works better in like almost these blocked formats. And I was on a podcast with a good friend of mine that years ago, I was still in my corporate career. This was way before I ever had a podcast. He used to bring me on his all the time. So we did a collaboration podcast, or he had me on as a guest for a Q&A. And he was asking me like, what was my time constraint or something of that sort. And I told him, I was like, listen, I have unlimited time today. This is my last thing of the day. I've been doing client check-ins till 3 a.m. or since 3 a.m. It's 4 o'clock. So like we can run the timer out. And I remarked that this is such a blessing. We're actually doing this as part of our career. Now, we do not get any monetary incentives from this. We aren't accepting payments, none of that. But how much of a blessing it is to be able to get on a podcast and connect with someone like yourself, and someone that's we will be able to have a friendship going forward as a result of this. And this is part of our commitment to our clientele, to our businesses, but also our way of expressing the things that we've learned and the things that we truly cherish in this coaching domain. And I thought to myself, how blessed, and the reason he was asking me was because in years past, we hadn't done a podcast in a long time. I was always rushed because I had a corporate career and I was always on like this time clock. And I thought to myself, my man, we're essentially on the clock, but we have unlimited time first and foremost, and we're getting to do this as a job. So take this in. He's a big podcaster. So like he does podcasts all day. So I don't know if I wanted to express that to him because I don't know if he appreciates it because he was one after another. But I just took a moment and I said, man, how blessed are we to be able to get on a podcast, catch up with one another, communicate the science to many people out there, thousands of people, be able to give them something to listen to through their commutes or through hard days or through their cardio. And this is part of our workday now. It's not something we had to reschedule, nothing. So just, I want to express that gratitude. And secondarily, thank you for doing this with me. This was an absolute pleasure. So Sarah, before we wrap up, would you let our audiences know where they can find you?
So Instagram really is probably the best place to find me. I'm on there multiple times a day, as my people already know, but anyone else is welcome to have a look at my profile and just see everything we've spoken about in the space. I'm always trying to, and I'm not, one thing I will actually quick just add, Brandon, is I'm not scared to come forward with the things that need to be said in the space. And that's super important to me because I only affiliate with myself. So, of course, collaborations, but I will always do my absolute best through my Instagram, through my podcast. So it's at Sarah Parker underscore BB. So if you're ready to see more of the truths of bodybuilding, of course, I'd be grateful for anyone to follow, or of course the podcast, the Beyond Condition podcast, which is also on YouTube as well. Now you need to share your digits.
Absolutely. So, guys, if you have enjoyed this conversation and you want other insightful conversations, please feel free to look up the Chasing Clarity podcast, which is available on Spotify and iTunes. And then for anything regarding me, the best place to find me is on Instagram at Brandon DeCruz underscore. I do educational content on a daily basis, and you will always get the facts and the stats. And I am someone that's very big into providing evidence behind my claims because I have a lot of experience and a lot of anecdote, but I do like providing evidentiary support because I feel that our space has gotten a little bit watered down with too many claims that are not substantiated. So if you guys are looking for facts, stats, and just a really real way to transform your physique, please feel free to follow my stuff. And Sarah, this was an absolute pleasure. We'll sign off now. But guys, thank you for listening to another episode, and we'll see you next time. Peace.